Welcome back to Vintage HLC Show and Tell. Today we're looking at pattern JJ-59 called Moss Rose by Collectors on the Virginia Rose shape. This was made for J.J. Newberry 5 and dime stores from the early 1930s into the late 1960s. So we'll start by looking at the decal. The dinner plate has 3 sprigs. There's the large version, the medium, and then the small one. Platinum edge line. There's the Virginia Rose embossing. Virginia Rose refers to the shape, not the pattern. There were many patterns used on Virginia Rose. This is just one of them. There's the back stamp from 1964, and it says at the end N4, plant number 4 in Newell, West Virginia. Most Virginia Rose was made at plant number 8, but by the time you get to the 1960s, it switches over to plant number 4. Look at a salad nappy. And this one's 1945, plant number 8. So I want to do a comparison shot before moving on with VR128. These are the 2 most common patterns on Virginia Rose. And sometimes they can be found mixed together. But this was for G.C. Murphy's VR128, and this, of course, J.J. Newberry. It's a rather extensive line. It used all the Virginia Rose shapes and some pickup pieces. So we see the Wells double egg cup, the Cable double egg cup. You can always tell Cable by its little collar in the middle. We'll do a comparison shot so you can see the difference in heights. There were no salt and pepper shakers in the Virginia Rose shape, so they picked up sets from other lines. These come from Swing Eggshell. They also used Debutante or Jubilee shakers later on. Baltimore mug, another pickup piece. Rather generic shape. Some people call these shaving mugs, but they're actually coffee mugs. This one's dated 1940, and since it's not the Virginia Rose shape, it doesn't have a Virginia Rose back stamp. It just has a regular Homer Laughlin marking. Jade butter dish with Moss Rose. This comes from 1943. '24's jug, also known as a batter jug. The ones from the 30s usually will have lids, but later on they get rid of the lids, so it's not uncommon to find these as open jugs from the 40s and 50s. This one's from 1949. And then there were companion kitchenware pieces. So here's an oven-served pie plate and a kitchen craft casserole. So now we'll look at a special treatment listing from 1934, and it's the first instance we see the JJ-59 pattern in any type of catalog listings. And since this was released in January of 34, this would have been printed in 33. So we see JJ-59. It says it's on the Virginia Rose shape, VAR, RK, the Rent-A-Kiln, the type of ware used, 3 sprigs of 019 silver edge or platinum edge. But the 019 is telling us that this is a decal treatment that originates on Orleans as 019. So I took some pictures of some shop samples at the factory on my last visit home, and I found the 019 plate. And here it is, Orleans. It's an embossed rim with a scalloped edge. There's our Moss Rose decals, 019. 19 being a low number, this is one of the original treatments on Orleans. So this would date from around 1932. It was then used on Ravenna, which is very similar to Orleans, as RV36. It went on to be used on Wells as W2543 with platinum edge. And it says slight handles. A lot of these shop samples will have a note underneath the treatment number on how to deal with the handles and finials. The ones we looked at already, Orleans and Ravenna, there are no notes because there's no edge trim. But in this case, it's saying slight handles. And what that means is for the handles and finials, you just put in slight brush strokes. If it said solid or bar handles, then they would be like a solid platinum band going on there. If it says scheme, which you don't see that too often, usually trellis treatments will have scheme handles. There's some type of pattern, so it might be like dash, 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 all the way down. So if you see slight handles on these pictures, that's what it's talking about. How do you handle the handles and the finials? Then we see it on Century. C107. This is Century vellum, and then it's used again in the form of white ivory, the C205. So I'll back up, you can see the difference in the glazes, vellum and white ivory. I suspect this actually didn't go into production. There were several different patterns used on white ivory on Century, but we never see them on the open market, and this 205 was reassigned later on as a completely different treatment. Then the decals are used on VR125, I'm sorry, it's VR152, and it has gold stipple on the edge, which is rather unusual. There are not a lot of dinnerware lines made by Homer Laughlin that have gold stippling. Usually you see gold stippling on toiletware from the teens and 20s, so it's really unusual to see it here as VR152. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 patterns, or treatments, depending on the shape. And we have 6 treatment numbers. But what happens in 34, once it becomes an exclusive for J.J. Newberry, all of these disappear. And all the pound sterling books that follow, none of these are listed. So they're immediately discontinued. So if you find any of these examples, be it Orleans, Ravenna, Wells, Century, or the Virginia Rose version with gold stippling, it's a pretty rare piece. I've actually never seen any example other than these shop sample plates. I've heard of Orleans. In fact, Richard Ratcher, if I'm not mistaken, he noted in his Virginia Rose book that someone had an Orleans platter. But what happens once J.J. Newberry takes on this pattern as an exclusive, it becomes a rather strict exclusive. We don't see it on any shape that follows Virginia Rose except for the pickup pieces and the kitchenware. As opposed to something like VR128, go back to that for a second, this was used on other lines. In fact, if you get rid of one of the sprigs, you have VR178. It was used on Wells's W4643. So it's a little more relaxed as opposed to JJ-59. From newspapers.com, we have an advertisement. This one's from 1959. And we see it has a Virginia Rose set, 32 pieces for $9.98. I wanted to show this because they're not calling it Moss Rose, they just called it Virginia Rose. G.C. Murphy was sort of the same way with their VR128 pattern. It was just Virginia Rose. They didn't give it any special name or pattern. Moss Rose is something that was conjured up by collectors. Another advertisement. This one comes from March 20th, 1968. We see Newberry's, and it says, final clearance, close out on open stock dinnerware, and at the bottom we see Virginia Rose. And so the prices are half off, or in some cases more than half off. So this is the end of the Moss Rose pattern on Virginia Rose. Again, 1968. That's not terribly surprising, considering that Homer Laughlin, like other potteries that were still around during that time, stopped using platinum and gold trim. So any pattern that called for it, be it on Virginia Rose or the Republic shape or any of the others, they would have been discontinued in the late 1960s. You think about the other shapes that were made during that time and the ones that followed, let's say Provincial or Bristol or Hearthside or Granada, none of those have gold and platinum. It was just something that they stopped in the late 1960s. So that's going to be it for today. Pattern JJ-59, Moss Rose on the Virginia Rose shape for J.J. Newberry.